You're listening to Bigger Than Belief, real stories about real faith with real people whose belief is unbelievable. I'm your host, Adam Duxter. Thanks for listening to Bigger Than Belief. Today is Thursday, May 14th, and today we're going to tackle what is perhaps the most controversial topic we've ever covered on this show. A local topic to the Twin Cities that's drawn not just the attention, but the anger of some of our nation's top elected officials. This comes weeks after it was revealed a Twin Cities school district would be making a number of new accommodations to serve Muslim students as part of building construction and updates, including at one school, stations to wash feet, and at another, a multipurpose room that could specialize as a space for daily prayer. When the news went public, it quickly drew outrage from top elected officials in the U.S. with comparisons to Sharia law and the highlighting of double standards of the role faith can or should be playing in the American public school system. Given the national reach this conversation has garnered, we wanted to understand it and unpack it fully. Are these spaces really needed? What purpose do they provide? And is there a double standard at play? And what impact does it have when these conversations are happening to begin with? To do that, we wanted to have a really great guest because we know this is a sensitive conversation. So we wanted to bring on a guest, not just with decades of lived experience, but also someone who's incredibly skilled at walking and talking across faith boundaries and faith lines. And that's why I feel that is exactly the fit that today's guest provides. Imam Makram El-Amin has served at Masjid An-Nur in Minneapolis for decades, but he's also highly skilled in interfaith conversations, having served on the advisory board of the Muslim-Christian Dialogue Center at the University of St. Thomas. He recently acquired his master's in divinity and Islamic chaplaincy. He has 3 kids and a handful of grandkids to boot as well. Before we dive into today's conversation, if you enjoy this type of content or you have an appreciation of the work putting difficult topics into perspective, please take a second to rate us 5 stars for this episode and for this show. If you like this episode, please share it with a friend or leave a review. Again, those quick actions help grow what we're doing and ultimately change the way traditional media talks about faith. So now, after all that, Imam Makram El-Amin. We now welcome on a very special guest, someone who I'm excited to sit down with and talk to and really learn from. This is Imam Makram El-Amin, nearly 3 decades as the Imam of Masjid An-Nur in North Minneapolis. Imam Makram, thank you so much for joining us and making time, first of all. I'd love for our viewers or our listeners who have never met you or had a chance to get to know you, just to get a super quick, just kind of getting to know you bio.
Yeah.
What should people know?
Yeah. First of all, thank you, Adam, for the opportunity to come on the show. And I think that what I would like people to know is that I'm a person that I'm a real person, having a human experience, in a spiritual space, and really want to improve the world as much as I can, one person at a time. And this is something that I try to bring forth in my work every single day, and something that is important to me, that just our inherent dignity and worth as human beings is affirmed in all that we're doing. So that would be my elevator pitch if I had to, say who I am and all the other things we can get into at some point. But that's the main thing for me.
And that's really, part of the reason why we wanted to have you on, because your work goes beyond, even the 4 walls of any one building. It is intentional in the community to connect people, to build people up, and to really work. And that is kind of one of the reasons that I wanted to have you today, specifically as we're looking at this issue we have of faith and community and division and separation and misunderstandings and just kind of a lack of knowledge of one another that is now ballooned up to be not just a local issue, but a national one.
Yeah.
Of course, we're talking about, we have Ted Cruz and Tom Emmer talking about plans for a local high school to do some redevelopment. There are plans labeled as we're going to put in a prayer room. There's going to be space to wash feet. And it has just gone absolutely viral.
Yeah.
I guess my first question for you is, does that surprise you to see just the way that this has taken on such a life of its own almost?
Frankly, it does not surprise me, but that doesn't mean I'm not disappointed by it. I think that it's something that speaks to a narrative, I think, that has been created about Islam and Muslims, particularly here in Minnesota. And these, persons who have been elected to serve us and our interests are using this situation that the WCCO schools are doing to accommodate its Muslim students, a growing Muslim population, and using it to, again, stoke fear and sow doubt in the minds of people who are maybe not as informed or maybe not as even open-minded. I mean, they have been kind of bought some of those stereotypes and things about Muslims. And I think it's unfortunate, especially for, I think one of the things that I consider to be civilized and civilized society is the ability to speak across difference and do it in a way that still maintains our dignity, right? And I think that there is an element of this is just trying to really strip people's dignity from them and other them in a space that will allow for other things to happen to a particular group of people and where other folks will be okay with that. And I think that's the challenge, I think, of faith in these moments, to speak truth to very powerful individuals who have opportunity to change lives and influence what lay people do. And I think that, words are very powerful. I think as a person of scripture, person of text, we come to know that. And, people of influence must choose words wisely. And I just think this is a part of a misappropriation of their privilege to serve others. That's how I view these comments. I've read a little bit about it. I read enough to get the gist, not all the detail. I don't need the details of this, that this is the same tune being played over again. So once I got the gist of it, I was okay, that I understood what they were trying to do.
I want to take a step back and simply even just further contextualize ourselves in this conversation.
Sure.
Because many people know this. Islam, the fastest growing religion globally. Right. And a lot of that is outside the United States, but a good portion of that is in the United States.
It is.
And also here in Minnesota. And we're starting to see Islam spread from, if you want to call them the downtown cores, right, into the suburbs. We saw the city of Lakeville approve a mosque. It'll be the first one in its area. And we saw the hurdles that went through and kind of the back and forth that went through. And of course, in this instance, we're talking about a growing need outside of the city. When you look at kind of a 1,000-foot view, if you will, I mean, is part of why we're seeing this because we're seeing Islam spread into areas maybe it hasn't been in the past?
Yes, I think so. I think that's part of I think that's part of it. I think it's part of it. The other part is this is very intentional effort to demonize, and to make, to create a space where folks are, through their lack of knowledge and or engagement with Islam and Muslims, it's very easy, because of the human condition, it's very easy to formulate thoughts and ideas and concepts, be as wrong as two left shoes about them, but act upon them as though they're a fact and act upon them as though they are a reality because of where the source, who's bringing it forth. I think this is something that, again, I'm not surprised about, but again, I can't help but still being a bit disappointed in the lack of judgment Not intentional. I think this is very intentional, but I don't think it's good judgment. It's not good judgment. There was a whole lot of things going back and forth while ICE was on the ground here in Minneapolis, though they're still on the ground, but less than they were. And there was a lot of language flying back and forth. And I knew I was disturbed by that because I just, again, understanding the power of language and how wars began and, genocides and they began with words. They began with words that are formulated, ideas that are starting to be communicated, and they end up as actions and sometimes devastating actions, And I think that this is something that we have to be very cognizant about as people of faith specifically, and, as well as, in our quest or in our obligation to serve is for everyone, right? So these representatives are supposed to represent me. They're supposed to represent a constituency. And to neglect that, for something that's politically expedient, I just think is very, very bad judgment.
To look at the issue at hand, though, what we're talking about, to have space for prayer in schools or a space to wash feet in schools, as someone who's not a practicing Muslim, I guess I can ask, is there a need for that? And if so, why?
So I think, really it becomes an issue of people showing up as their best selves, right? So it's an idea to where, as a person of faith, there are certain things that we know that would help us to show up as our best self. For us as a Muslim, as Muslims, prayer 5 times a day at designated times is a staple. It's a staple part of our life. It's for those who are practicing. It is a regular kind of a beat by which our day kind of goes with, right? So we base our day around the prayer, whether we are very early in the morning before the sun rises, intervals throughout the day, or at night before we go to sleep. These are just very prescriptive kinds of things. So if I'm in school and prayer will come in as it will during the midday, et cetera, if I'm able to take a pause from my busy day, and I'm able to spend 5 or 10 minutes, because that's really what the length of the prayer is, about 10 minutes maximum, and reflect on my relationship with God and my relationship with humanity. And I do that in a very devout way, not trying to draw attention to myself, but trying to do it in a way that is just me and my Creator in that moment. Though we might be tens of hundreds of us, whatever, it's still me and God, basically, in that moment. If I'm able to do that, I say that I'm a better version of myself for that. So what could be wrong for that? What could be wrong with that? And I think that if we look at it just from a very base situations, there are many varying groups with varying identities, faith and otherwise, who seek and ask for accommodation about certain things so that they feel they can show up in their best version of themselves, right? I think to recognize, and I credit Osceola School District for this, to recognize the growing population, to recognize the need, to recognize what has been voiced, I'm sure, by parents and leaders and advocates and so on, that this would be a great help, and it will be also an attraction, to the school that, much like I spent some time last school year at McAllister College as a chaplain for the Muslim Students Association. And McAllister College, a Presbyterian Christian university, very prestigious, by the way, right, has a space of washing, a space of prayer, a space of accommodation that it does for that. St. Thomas University, who I lecture at, I speak there, I do all kinds of programming there as well, also has a built out, just better than some of the mosques that I've seen in some ways, right? Because it is a value that they bring forth to create space for the neighbor and likewise. And I don't know what faith these representatives profess. I don't know what it is, but from what I know, from my Christian colleagues, Jewish colleagues, and others, that there is always a space for accommodation, for others, and likewise in Islam, right? So when I see that, I see the best version, and that's the version that I'm attracted to. That's the version that I want to work with. That's the version that I want to build a new life and future with, here in Minnesota and beyond, right? Those who can understand that there is a need. It's something that if I can tap into that space that allows a person, an individual or a group or congregation, whatever the faith community, to really embrace the fullness of themselves, then why wouldn't I do that?
Do you feel like there is any sort of double standard where people can go out and say they're trying to take Christianity out of public schools, right? Or that, because that is a thing that people really do feel.
Yeah.
Or just told, hey, public school or school in general is not a place for faith conversations. I think that I've seen a lot of discourse along those lines.
Yeah.
And I feel like that is kind of maybe driving for some people the frustration around this concept of, I'm told, I can't bring my full self if I am a Christian, but the other groups are getting special accommodations. Do you hear that? And what would you say to someone who says that?
I think that there is space to have accommodation. I don't think that there's something. I think that the challenge comes in is when these things are superimposed. When they're superimposed, that everyone must do the same. In the same way, same space. But if there's accommodations for those to express in the ways that they want to do that, and it makes sense based on the population and the demographic and those sorts of things, I say that that's just good governance. I think that that's just good leadership, as opposed to that. I mean, I have no problem for Christians and Jewish faith practitioners to exercise that. You know what I mean? I remember when I was in school, so many, many years ago, elementary school and the like, where they didn't call it winter break, they call it Christmas break. I remember that. I remember that there's times now that school will be let out for Yom Kippur, right? I remember the Good Friday. And these are recognized kinds of things that happen in the space of that as an accommodation for that, and rightfully so. There's nothing wrong with that, right? So I think that, if we say double standard, I said, which way are we talking here? Which way? Because these are long-standing. These are non-starters. If you try to plan a school year and not accommodate, these are non-starters. They won't go. So what are we really saying? I think that's kind of some deflection, perhaps, and that's not really based on reality, a long historical reality of what has been accommodated and what has not.
You brought up Operation Metro Surge, and I'm glad you did, because I want to ask about where we are at right now as a community in the Twin Cities.
Yeah.
As we're taping this on April 29th, we just saw more than a dozen, close to 24 different, if you count between daycares and autism resource centers, raided by the FBI, HSI, and state investigators yesterday.
Yeah.
And then if you look at the last 4 years as a whole, or 5 years as a whole, when you look at what we saw with Operation Metro Surge, paired with those investigations, did you feel like there is a growing rhetoric, anti-Muslim rhetoric here in the Twin Cities? Is that something that people feel on the inside? And if so, I mean, how do you characterize what has taken place in our community over the last few years?
I say it's not a new thing. I'm an African American in this country. I know what it is to be criminalized. I know what it is to be to have the actions of a few to be cast over a whole community. I know what it's like to have unfair treatment by the law and law enforcement. I understand what this is. This is not a new thing. This is just a new version of this thing. The fact that I sit at the intersection of being an African American and a Muslim, it is coming in a layered way for me in this moment right now. But this is not a new thing. It's not like an anomaly. This is how these things have rolled out historically, right? Likewise for Catholics and Jews and others, right? And let's not forget that. I mean, there were times when folks they didn't get fair treatment under the law. They couldn't go to certain schools. They had to create their own schools and their own hospitals and their own places to accommodate their lives, right? But it was all created by a narrative to say that these people are not okay, right? So my question back is, when are we going to learn from what history says, and also look at the full view that these communities that we've all named, Catholic, Jewish, and others, they persevered. They didn't go away. They're still here, right? And they're still subject to different things, but they have a footing now. They have a footing, and a strong footing, and are a force, and it continues to be accommodated and to be reckoned with in the society in which we live in, right? So history says that. History says that. So while I feel that there are there different standards and all that? Listen, I think these are same songs, different tunes, same songs, different channels, whatever the case, however you want to cliche this kind of a thing. But this is not a new thing. And I think if just a quick review of history will show us that.
How would you characterize this current moment, though? I mean,
I think it's tense. I think it's dangerous. I think that it is. It's going to cause polarization, more and more polarization. I think it is also allows for people to be lazy, intellectually lazy, and have this cognitive dissonance about different things, and to see one thing and automatically equate it to be something else, right? I think if we think about fraud, for example, right? Fraud is not new to Minnesota. It's definitely not a new thing, right? And if we look at those who have perpetrated fraud, and let's just look at the state level. Let's keep it right there too. And we just look at case by case, and let's who has been the biggest perpetrators of this thing, right? And I think it will be alarming to some, and I think it would just be validated to others who actually know, right? It's not who is in front of the camera right now. It's not that. Right, so I think it's a dangerous precedent to set that a minority. This is one of those things that comes when you are not a part of the majority population, right? To where you have this thing called it's like a group consciousness, right? So there are things to where that the stakes are higher because you're in lesser number. That if someone amongst your group, however you define group, steps outside of the norm, commits a crime, hurts someone, etc., then that is a reflection on the entire group, right? So I think that's the pain, that's the anguish that we feel right now because of the dynamics that are set up. When other group people, they don't have to accommodate. They say, that they can attribute it to mental illness or some other thing, but it's never about their group of origin. It's never about that. Right, so I think these are the kinds of things that I think when we have some discernment, when we're not being intellectually lazy, and when we're not just relied upon sound bites and without real substance to really guide us to proper conclusions. These are the things that I think is danger that we have in this, and I think that we're in a very slippery slope right now. There are times now where truth, becomes relative. There are people, everyone has their own version about, they spin, everything is spent, in a way to be framed in a positive light for the one who has the biggest microphone, literally, right, at that moment. So I think that these are very, very dangerous times, but people of faith are people who value truth. If we value what is truth, what is real, what is reality. And even our faith encourages us that we are to stand for justice, even in our tradition specifically, even if it be against our own self or someone who's close to me or my relative. I have to stand no matter what. So relative to those who have committed wrongdoing, they are wrong and they should feel the full weight of the law. But just because they're in proximity to me, I have done nothing. So don't paint me with the same brush as that.
And I do want to ask about that. I'm glad you brought it up because for me within my Christian faith,
Yeah.
I'd like to say that there is a guideline or a rubric, or when life is happening, you look back on your faith, you read the writings, you experience your faith, and that helps guide you through.
Yeah.
How does your faith help guide you through? Is there anything you go back to? Is there anything that you look to? And if so, what that kind of helps you as you are going through times that are really difficult?
God says to us in our text, he says, surely with every difficulty, there's ease. Surely with every difficulty, there's ease. So even though I'm going through a difficult time, either individually or collectively or the like, that there's also an opening in it. There's also an opening. It seems very dark. It seems very daunting. But because we believe that God speaks truth and only truth, he says there's ease within the hardship itself. So I think as a experienced, practitioner, we begin to look for that. I recognize we're in a very challenging, difficult moment right now. But because I believe what God says, my faith requires this of me, that I also must look at somewhere in here there's an opening. Somewhere in here there is a way to access some ease through this difficult moment that I'm in. So my work is to uncover, to discover that. My work is to be in conversation, which is the reason I accepted the invitation, because it's an outgrowth of that principle that's in my faith tradition. It wasn't just because I had a whole lot of time on my hands.
Yeah. If anything, the opposite.
Yeah, absolutely.
After talking with you.
Absolutely.
The last couple of things I want to ask you about. One is, so much of what you do is multi-faith, is talking to people across faith boundaries. Why?
Because I think that's what we're here for. We believe in our tradition that there's no such thing as coincidence. There's no such thing as this, the random kinds of thing. That's just a, false construct, essentially. That God says in our tradition that it says there's not a leaf that falls from the tree anywhere in the world, in the universe, that's not already written in a book. Right? So the fact that we share space and proximity in this moment in time and history was already been determined. Now the issue is, how are we going to negotiate space together? How are we going to do this? But this was already written for us. So I'm not a proponent of this. This is just random kinds of things. We knew this time would come. We knew God knew what administration would be here and what we would have to contend with. And I'm still pressed upon me to be the best Muslim I can possibly be. And that means that I have to stand firmly for justice, be compassionate of those, that I cannot be intellectually lazy in these moments, because God requires that I stand upon truth. However difficult that is to come to it, I have to do that, right? So I think that we're in a moment that is a moment of that separates those who are true versus those who are not. It's very easy when times are convenient. It's very easy to be happy when it's 75 degrees out and it's sunny. A cool breeze and everything is great. I'm happy. But when a storm is coming, or a blizzard is upon us, what about then? What about then? So we're experiencing that. We're experiencing a storm, blizzard, whatever metaphor you want to use. But that doesn't diminish my faith in God. That doesn't diminish my belief in who I am. And who I believe ultimately who you are, as another human being sharing in space and proximity on this earth, right? And I have to behave in that way. So the fact that we work across that, listen, we're human before anything. We're human, right? That means that you have a heart, I have a heart, you have a soul, I have a soul. I believe we're both answerable for the life that we live in this world here, and justice won't always come in this time, but it will come. It absolutely will come. So I'm resolute about that. And so I think that, why do I do that? Because God calls me to do that. God said, if I wanted you to all be the same, I would have made you that way.
With that said, and this is the last thing I want to ask about, is I've always subscribed to the belief that people hate the things they are afraid of, and they're afraid of the things that they don't understand, right? And so when we look at this issue and this division, how much of this is simply just us not understanding each other enough, which has led to our fear of one another, which has led to our hatred of one another? If you're following that,
I understand. I think that at a level is very true. However, I think that for those who are in positions of authority and leadership, it is their responsibility to know. I lead a congregation of multi-faith, a multi-ethnic congregation, a very diverse group. And I know that it's my obligation to come and to know the world that we live in and how to frame that and communicate that and message to those who trust me, who come to me as a trusted source. So for me to have a narrow view of the reality of the world, I'm doing a disservice to my congregation. Likewise, if I was an elected official or leader, et cetera, it's incumbent upon me to know. It's my business to know. So I think for the common layperson, perhaps it's a matter of people not knowing. But I think that, we know a whole lot about a whole lot of things that we don't even want to say we know about at the highest levels of government and even in just the space of faith. So I think that it's on a certain level, it's true, but on another level, it's a little too convenient to say that. I think there are people who absolutely know. They know the tenets of my religion. They know what we believe. They know the history. They know all these things. Yet and still, they have a different ulterior motive. They have something else that they're motivated by. Right? This is not true. It goes that against Islam. Even those amongst Muslims, they have the same. We have the same. We have those who have a lot of knowledge but bad intentions. That happens. It's a human thing. It happens. So I'm saying that in response to you, is it about us not knowing? Yes, on a certain level it is. But it is also a matter of something that's being manufactured right now. It's a manufactured division meant to fracture us. So because if I can keep you over there and you can keep me over here, and whoever narrative is strongest, right, it will justify what happens. Brian Stevenson, and I mentioned I was in Montgomery, Alabama at the EJI Center, and he, in fact, a movie was made recently. Michael B. Jordan played him in Just Mercy. He was the figure in Just Mercy, and he said, I listened to him at the Ebenezer Church in Atlanta recently, and he said, the worst thing that happened to our people was not Jim Crow or slavery or unfair treatment by the law or high rates of incarceration or whatever. Those weren't the worst things that have happened to us. He said the worst things that happened to us was the narrative that was created about our people that made all those things be okay. I'm very concerned about narrative because it makes certain things okay for certain people. And I think that if that doesn't resonate with us as people of faith, then I think we are in deep trouble as a society. Yeah.
If people want to find you, hear more from you, learn more about what you do, what's the best way they can do that? masjidannoor.org and elmaun.org, ALMAAUUN.org is our service arm of the work that we do on a day-to-day basis. Thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure.
And your context on this issue.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to today's episode of Bigger Than Belief. If you enjoyed today's episode or found it informative in any way, please, please, please take the time to rate us 5 stars in the app right now where you are listening. Or if you've listened to a handful of these episodes and say, hey, I actually really like this show, I'm tuning in weekly, or have caught a few episodes here and there, please write a review for us in the app where you're listening. Simply put, that is the biggest way you can help support this type of content and these episodes is by doing those 2 things. We will be right back next week with another brand new episode of Bigger Than Belief, and it's with someone who we are really excited to have a conversation with. A little bit of a hint, he is the first chart-topping musician we've had on this show. So that episode coming up next week, you will not want to miss it. But for now, be well, and we will see you very soon.
Love podcasts? Love Minnesota?
Check out the WCCO podcast studio lineup.
Hear the top stories of the day with 4 things to know.
Discover top female athletes and teams from around the state on women in sports.
Dive into stories about faith and belief from your local leaders to your neighbors next door with Bigger Than Belief.
Stay in the know on the go with the WCCO podcast studio. Go to WCCO.com/podcasts.